Welcome back. So you might remember this desert rose from an earlier video where I pruned off the 4 main branches of this desert rose to encourage back branching to, in the future, be able to create a beautiful canopy for a bonsai tree out of this desert rose. That was done last summer, and it is early spring now where I live, and this desert rose has been pretty much dormant for a majority of the winter. It has just now started to start growing new leaves. I have not watered this desert rose at all during the winter, so the soil is 100% dry. And what I'm going to do today is actually take this desert rose out of this pot, do some root work on it, and put it back into the same pot. But instead of the potting soil that I used last year for it, I'm going to use my blend of soil that I have started using that is specifically designed for desert roses. It prevents a lot of root rot, and it encourages a lot more root development and a lot more vigorous growth also. So that's what I'm going to do today. So the first thing I'm going to start with is just seeing how tight this desert rose is grown in the soil. Got some roots way down there. This guy grew some deep, deep roots last spring and last summer. All right. Just kind of pressing, since this soil is so dry, I could just kind of squeeze it a little bit and it falls away from the roots. Very nice. Very nice. I like that little space that's right there. I'm going to do a little bit of root training on this plant today too, to develop the roots to look really attractive in the future on this plant. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look this plant over, and it's completely healthy. There's no root rot anywhere on this desert rose, which is really good. And that's one reason why, that's the main reason why you don't water desert roses in the wintertime when they go dormant. They don't need the water. The water is just going to cause problems with the lower temperatures. So, all right. First thing I'm going to do is empty this pot of its current soil. Set this guy down. All right, and the next thing I'm going to work on is some of these roots that are high up. I don't like them. I don't want them. They're going to be a distraction in the future, especially when this is a bonsai. So I'm going to cut those roots off using a razor blade. You don't want to use pruners because that's more of a squeezing action, where this you could just slice it off. But the first thing you want to do before you use any kind of cutting object on a desert rose is you want to disinfect it. I'm just going to be using normal rubbing alcohol. on a rag. And I'll take my knife or razor blade and I will just disinfect it with that rubbing alcohol. Put the lid back on there. Okay, so I'm just going to see. I want to see if I can get you guys so you guys can see what I'm doing. Just slowly and carefully so I don't cut myself. Cut these roots off. Flush with the trunk of the tree. And I'll take this one off. And then I can come back and make this cut more flush, like so. And I'll just work my way around the trunk, taking off any roots that I don't like. Now this particular desert rose has beautiful, solid red flowers. So here in probably about a month and a half, maybe 2 months, it should start blooming again. And hopefully this year, we'll get more flowers than what we had last year, since we have more branches. But over the coming years, as we continue to develop this tree and develop the branch structure of this tree, it will be able to produce more and more flowers. Because the more branches you have on a desert rose, the more flowers that desert rose can produce. Take this one off also. Might as well take that one off there too. Now, oftentimes, what I will do when I repot a desert rose is I will take it out of its current pot, examine the roots, and let the desert rose dry in the shade, oftentimes in my house, for 7 to 10 days. And what that does is any roots that were damaged by unpotting it will have time to dry out those wounds and callus over, so you don't get root rot when you replant your desert rose. This particular desert rose, I'm not going to do that for a couple reasons. One, this desert rose hasn't been watered all winter, like I said. So this is a perfect time to repot it. And since it's not moist and the soil that I'll be repotting in is 100% dry, what I'll be able to do is take this desert rose straight from its old pot and repot it into, well, the same pot again, but with new soil. And I just won't water this desert rose for the next 5 to 7 days in its new potting soil. And what that would do is basically the same thing as air drying it, where all these cuts that I'm doing, all these wounds that I'm making, will have time to callus over the next 5 to 7 days in the pot with soil without me watering it. So I don't have to just leave this desert rose sitting here on this table like I normally would do if I was repotting this plant in the summertime after it has been watered already. So some people are worried that you always have to hang your desert rose in the shade or leave it on a table in the shade for a week to dry it out when you repot. You don't have to do that if you're planted it in 100% dry soil and you don't water it for a week after that, and also if it's coming straight out of winter. All right, so that's what we have now. I think I'm happy with that. There's a few more I could take off, but I think I'll leave them on this side over here. A few, not this big one, but a few of these little ones, but I think I'll leave them till next year. When I originally purchased this desert rose a little over a year ago, it was planted to up here was the soil level. And then I raised it to right here last year, and I think this year I'm going to lower it to about right there this year. So about another 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. But another thing that I like to do on my desert roses is I like to use styrofoam and kind of push these roots apart. Even this one a little bit, just a little bit, and carefully. And what that does is it makes the desert rose wider, so it gives it more of a illusion of being an older, bigger tree. So I'm going to do that. I have just normal styrofoam that I use just from a package that I received. I break it off and I just more or less separate the roots a little bit, being careful not to hurt the roots. But this is actually, it's a good thing, because sometimes you'll buy a desert rose and the roots will all be intertwined together real tight in a straight down motion because they were grown in a really small pot at the nursery where you bought the plant from. And that in itself can cause root rot because the roots can't adequately grow, and any moisture is stuck there where it can't really dry out between the roots. So by spreading the roots apart a little bit, it actually allows the soil to dry around those roots a little bit, and it's actually healthier for the plant. So I was able to space this root away from this root probably about 1/4 inch by putting this in here. I could have had a bigger piece of styrofoam, but I don't want to do too much at one time and possibly crack this root. So I spaced this root from this one, and I also spaced these two roots from those two big ones going back towards the back of the tree. So I like that. I'm happy with that. The next thing I'm going to do is set this to the side, bring the pot back up. I'm going to cover the drain holes with a little bit of screen, just normal window screen, because this soil, the clay in it is real thin, real small, so it might go through those holes. So let me tell you about this soil that I use. This soil is made up with 50% turfus, which is a baked clay, and also 50% mini pine bark nuggets, okay? The clay gives you a lot of aeration and a lot of good water drainage, so you don't get the root rot. The pine bark gives you a little bit of water retention, so the desert rose has enough time to absorb water. But since our desert roses are more of a succulent than a tropical plant, they don't like their roots to be wet, and that's the reason why you get a lot of root rot in these plants if you use the wrong soil. So this soil blend is designed specifically for desert roses, so you get a lot of water drainage to prevent that root rot from happening. So all I'm doing right now is basically filling this pot up. I typically don't grow my desert roses in such large pots, and I thought about giving this one a smaller pot while I develop it, because I want it to go to be a bonsai, so eventually it's going to be in a much shallower pot. But since I already started making videos of this tree last year, with this tree being in this pot, I thought it might be helpful to the viewers if I continue to train this tree in this pot so it's more recognized by the viewers of the same tree, being the same tree, until it's ready to go into a bonsai pot in the future. Yep, I think that's about the level I want, because maybe just a tad more. And I'll spread these roots out a little bit. Let's see, let's put what I believe will be the front of the tree towards the camera. That will work. One nice thing about having a big pot, it's easier to get two hands inside here to dump the soil. And I'm just working the soil around any voids of the roots. you're gonna be able to see this back piece of styrofoam, but that's fine. This plant is in training, basically. It's a bonsai in training, but in the future, when I remove that styrofoam, this plant will look a lot more interesting because of the use of that styrofoam today. I think I just want a little more soil on this side. Typically each year you can raise your desert rose anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches in its pot. And that actually encourages your desert rose to grow a thicker and deeper root system, which in the desert roses is known as a cardex, I believe is how you pronounce it, which in the future, that root structure will take on the appearance of the trunk of the tree. So by actually repotting your desert rose each year and lifting it up that 1 inch to 2 inches, you're actually speeding up the growth of that tree to develop it quicker. So I'm happy with that today. What I'm going to do next is, I didn't make any cuts on the lower roots. I made all my cuts on this area here. So what I'm gonna use next is just normal ground cinnamon powder to go over top of all the cut marks that I made on my desert rose. And what ground cinnamon does is it helps to prevent fungus from getting into these cuts on your desert rose. And if I actually thought about it, I would have done this when it was loose, but I can still get it done now. This is just normal ground cinnamon that you buy from the grocery store. I think this cost me like $1. Nothing special. Smells delicious. And it just helps heal up these cuts on the desert rose. But along with also just not watering this plant, like I said, for the next 5 to 7 days will prevent your root rot. That should be good. Okay, I'll show you guys, I'll give you guys a 360 of what we have. And I hope you guys are looking forward to, as much as I am, for this canopy to just start growing and developing like crazy later on this spring and this summer, which it will start doing as soon as I start watering this plant. Like I said, 90% of these leaves grew within just the last month, because this tree knows that it's springtime. It knows it's time to grow. Even though I have not been watering this plant knows what time of the year it is, and it's just ready to start growing like crazy. So that's what I have for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, leave me a comment down below. Subscribe so you can see updates of this tree's development over the next 2 to 3 years, and I'll see you in the next video.